Good morning, everybody. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Linda Rohleder, who is sort of something of my personal guru in plants, because if I see a plant I can't identify, I send a picture to Linda. That's what I do. I'm not going to give you her email address so that you can't all do that. And if I see a bug I can't identify, I send it to Randy. So that's how it works. So it's a great relationship from my point of view anyway. Linda is the best person at working with volunteers that I have ever seen. And I think as many of us are chapter leaders and we are looking for volunteers and looking to keep volunteers happy, she is somebody who knows more about this than anybody else, and she just does a great job at it. Just very briefly, she has a PhD in ecological science from Rutgers. She founded Wildwoods Restoration Project in 2022 to mobilize volunteers to grow local ecotype native seeds for restoration projects in local parks. She works with over 300 volunteers, or has since the organization founded, and is working now in, I believe, about 8 different sites, restoring native understories in eight different sites throughout northern New Jersey and the Hudson Valley. And with no further ado, Linda's going to tell us how she does it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Elaine. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. I'm really pleased to be here. Some of you may not know, but I joined the New Jersey Native Plant Society in the early 1990s. I haven't continuously been a member, but it's nice to come back to my old haunt and see the expansion of the organization from, I think it was like 30 people meeting in the Holly House at Rutgers University. So this is quite impressive. Okay, so I'll start out with something that most of you probably already know, a very familiar site of our forest across the Northeast. And if you don't have this with the bare understory, it's probably full of invasives. If you have a nice diverse understory, congratulations. But this is mostly what we have, and it's not healthy. And what we really should have is something more like this, with the different layers in the forest. The herb layer, the leaf layer, the shrub layer, the subcanopy level, lots of diversity. And one of the things that I saw was, a lot of people are getting into pollinator gardens, and a lot of the nurseries are growing a lot of plants, not a lot of native plants. They have really showy flowers, and they are in the sun for pollinators. But in our area, we focus on forests because forests are historically the dominant ecotype in this area. If you don't do anything, and it's going to become a forest most likely. And the forest understory actually represents about 90% of the diversity that's in a forest. So when we're missing that understory, we're missing a heck of a lot of diversity. Also, up to 1/3 of native bees in the Northeast are forest associates. That means that they're associated with that ecotype more than others. And so by not having all of that diversity in our forest understory, we're not serving those pollinators either. So we're really looking at some critical biodiversity here that's missing. So we need to restore the forest. Well, how can we do that? We all know there's some issues, right? The biggest one being deer. But also we'd have to remove invasives. But even when we deal with those, and there are quite a few park systems and volunteer groups that are trying to deal with those issues, you can't just sit back and wait, usually. The natives usually don't come back. And that's typically because there's not the propagules nearby to put the seeds in, or the seed bank isn't there anymore because it's come up and gotten eaten, come up and gotten eaten, come up and gotten eaten. There's no seeds in the seed bank. So active restoration is typically necessary, and we're moving more and more into that. So that's the area I decided I wanted to focus on. And so I created Wildwoods Restoration Project. Our mission is to restore the health and diversity of our Hudson Valley forest. We're focused in the Hudson Valley. We're located in Orange County, New York, but we also work in northern New Jersey. And we view that as part of our region. And we are growing local native plants for restoration, and we're trying to inspire a passion for continued stewardship of those areas. So I'll talk about the details of that. So first off, we partner with parks. So we put together an MOU, an agreement with them, what they will do, what we will do. They have to commit to doing invasive species removal and providing some kind of protection from deer. We reward them with free native plant restorations. Okay. And we jointly plan together what the restoration is going to be, what species are going in, and how it's going to work. So what we do is we collect the local seeds, we grow them, and we have potting up work days where we take all of the supplies to the park, to the park partner's location, so that all of their local volunteers can be involved, and the volunteers that we get involved can be there at that park. And then they can, enjoy the results of what they're doing. So what we do is we bring the bins of soil and the seedlings, and we sit there and we pot up the seedlings into 2.5-inch pots. And that usually happens in late May to early July. And the volunteers then take a flat home to grow. And they don't have to, and you don't have to be at a potting up day in order to take a flat home. But we get the flats out to all of the volunteers. It's a distributed growing model. We don't have a nursery. We don't have acres of land. So we have it going out. And the volunteers can start with one flat, that's about 32 plants, or they can take more if they're experienced. We have a couple master gardeners that take 9, 10, 12. And so they grow those plants at home from June until September, and then they come back to us. That's the really heavy time where we're like, where can we put this flat? Because I have to divide them all up among the partners, and if it, remove the deads and things like that. But the reward for the volunteer is they get to grow these plants, they get to learn about growing these plants, but they also earn a percentage of plants free. They get a credit of 20% of what they were successfully able to grow, and then they can use that credit to shop for plants from us. And so some of the plants that the volunteers grow go back to the volunteers. So then we have in the fall, we have sites at our local parks and preserves. Our work days are in September and October, and we bring all the plants there and the tools, and volunteers do the planting. We lay out the plants where they're going to go, and they all get planted. So anybody, I should say, I'm hitting the wrong button. Sorry about that. I should say that anybody can participate in this because we're just planting plug-sized plants, 2.5-inch pots. We use bulb augers to plant, and so you'll see this boy is a kindergartner, and he was able to successfully plant plants. He wasn't able to keep his attention on the whole workshop, but but anybody can do this. All right. We also rescue native plants. So when we find out, this is sort of an ad hoc thing, when we find out that there's going to be some development in a nice area, typically at a park where they're going to be doing a construction project, putting a trail in, expanding the parking lot, but we can also do it if it's a private property. We recently did a private property where they were going to be putting a trail through the woods, and we rescued a bunch of plants. So we've done 5 rescues. We've rescued over 3,000 plants, including hundreds of bloodroot and trillium and false Solomon seal and Christmas ferns. So it's very rewarding. We pot those up, and then we get them into our restoration sites and public parks that are protected areas. So our restoration principles that we use are basically understanding the natural community that should be there. The right plant in the right place. We've all heard that, right? And typically that involves a little bit of detective work because we're dealing with an overstory canopy and not much in the understory. Maybe there's a remnant little half-eaten blueberry bush over here, or something that's been chomped down over there. So we're looking at, forensic evidence of what should be there. And for New York and New Jersey, there's been a lot of description of the vegetation communities, so we can then refer to those to decide what vegetation community should be. We also do monitoring, so we do a pre-planting vegetation plot where we identify all the species that are there and the percent cover that covers, so that we can go back later and do that same plot in the same location and measure the success that we've had. We are planning to do our first measurements this year, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we'll be able to see something in the statistics. We also use local ecotype native seeds and plants, so we're collecting locally. And I want to emphasize, we use local natives. We're missing species diversity in our forest. But not only that, we're rapidly losing our genetic diversity, right? Because when I got into native plants, where you get native plants, you mail order them from Prairie Moon, right? Or someplace like that. We're all buying our plants from a restricted set of nurseries that have a fairly restricted set of gene pools that they're growing from. And most of them are not growing from local plants here. Pinelands, one good one that is collecting locally. But the other thing that's missing in the nursery trade for the native plants is a lot of the plants are grown by cuttings, divisions, so they're clones. And so by not growing from seed, we're missing genetic diversity there as well. So I just wanted to present that concept. So the benefit of local ecotype is that we're, first of all, preserving that genetic diversity, which we don't know what's in that genetic diversity that may be adaptable for that population, adaptive for that population in the future. So we don't want to lose it. But the other thing is, if we're using local native seeds, they're adapted to the local conditions. So we have a better chance of success with the restoration. We're not bringing something from down in the south, trying to grow it up here, or something from up in the north and trying to grow it here, and it doesn't deal with our local conditions as well. I use red maple as my example. Red maple range there is the range map on the right. It can survive down in Florida, it can survive up in Canada and Maine, but if you were to take the local genetics from a natural population in one of those sites and put it in the other location, it's probably not going to do very well. So we want to preserve our local genetics by using local ecotype seed. So that introduces a problem. How far can we move a seed and have it not make a difference? This harkens back to the what's native. Is it native to your state? Is it native to the Northeast? Is it native to the United States? There's a flexible definition. So for seed transfer zones, what we're trying to find or trying to understand, and I'm not trying to understand this, but what I'm trying to look for information about is how far can that seed be moved and not be introducing maladapted genetics to that location. So for example, if I were to bring red maple from Florida up here, I can guess that that's probably going to have genetics that aren't going to survive as well up here, but I don't know that. I'm not a geneticist. I don't do the analysis. And so that's one of the big questions we've had to deal with and solve. If I collect seed from this park, can I use it over in this park that's 20 miles away? Probably yes. And so I'm going to tell you what we have sort of put together, but it's really an open question. And if you think about it, think of the species. If I'm dealing with something like pokeweed, it's ubiquitous, it's all over, it's spread by birds, they eat it, they fly all over. Those genetics could be the same up and down the eastern seaboard. But if we're talking about something like wild ginger that's dispersed by ants and they're isolated populations, the individual populations might be genetically different from each other. So I think the answer to this question is going to be species specific. And so we need a whole bunch of geneticists doing genetic work to figure this out. So yeah, 50 years from now, maybe we'll have an answer. And then throw into climate change into this question. So how does climate change affect this? Someone asked Doug earlier, you know, should we be bringing plants up from the south to put up here? Well, maybe, but how do we know whether we need to? And how do we know if we do that, if it's going to be helpful or not? So we're acting conservative, and we're saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that because most of the plants we're dealing with are common plants. We don't need to supplement the genetics. We don't need to bring something up here. So we're not going to deal with that right now. But yeah, a big question. So here's where we work, and I'm going to explain the ecoregions here. You'll see there's a horizontal horizontal line, or not horizontal, a diagonal line through the middle of the graphic there. That's northern New Jersey. That's separating northern Jersey from New York. The dark blue is the coast, and over into the sort of the lower right corner is New York City. So this red circle is sort of what we consider our region, North Jersey and the Hudson Valley of New York. The ecoregions we cover is fairly complex here. I'm going to tell you what ecoregions are in just a second. Actually, I realized that somehow I skipped 2 slides. Not sure how that happened. Okay, ecoregions. All right, so this is a map based on the EPA Level 3 Omernick ecoregions. Say that 10 times fast. But what it does is it sort of defines the physiogeographic provinces and geology underlying the vegetation communities that we have. And this is level 3. There's a level 1, there's a level 2, there's a level 4. We decided to settle on level 3. It's complex without being too complex to deal with. So you'll see the big aqua band that goes through from Maine all the way down through the northwestern New Jersey is the Northern Highlands. And that's one of our main ecoregions that we work in. The yellow band is the Piedmont. The dark blue is the Atlantic coast. So sort of this is a guideline for us that we're using and where we can move the seeds. So it's the same ecoregion. We can move within that ecoregion. But if I say that and you look at ecoregion 58, which is the aqua, you see a problem with that immediately, right? Because it goes way up into Canada and it goes way down into central Pennsylvania. So it doesn't quite make sense climatically, right? So we decided to overlay the USDA hardiness zones on that. And you'll notice these bands are sort of horizontal, whereas the ecoregions tended to be more vertical bands. So when we overlay this on top of the ecoregions, we get staying within the same hardiness zone and within the same ecoregion, which pretty much is the definition of where we're going to keep our seeds. Okay, we're going to move them within that area. Same hardiness zone, same ecoregion. Okay. All right, so that then leads to this, which is where we're working. So it simplifies it a little bit in that we are moving within the North Jersey and Lower Hudson Valley area, but you see there's actually 3 or 4 ecoregions that run through that area. So we still have to keep the separate ecoregions. All right, so We also do responsible seed collection. We collect from wild populations, but we do it very responsibly. We make sure that the population is healthy and large enough to collect from. Our volunteers that do this have to be trained. We do data collection when we do this, and we collect no more than 20% of the available seed, often much less than that. Because we don't want huge collections. You know, we're a volunteer group. We don't need massive amounts. So those are some of our guidelines. We don't collect from rare and endangered populations. We're only dealing with common species. We also preserve our provenance, because I told you we're going to keep seeds within the ecoregion, within the hardiness zone. We need to know where it came from. So that means when we collect seed, we have to keep that information. And we have to keep that with our plants as we grow them. Okay, so we do that. We also properly store the seeds. So there are seed banks. There's a seed bank in Staten Island that's a Mid-Atlantic seed bank, and the Northeast Seed Bank at the Native Plant Trust in Massachusetts. Typically, we don't send all of our seed there. We send larger collections that we don't really have room for. We keep our smaller collections in a refrigerator. But that refrigeration, you need to conserve, or you need to control the humidity, and refrigerators aren't great controlling the humidity. So that's sort of, we view that as a temporary storage. We're not going to use it in a few years, then it needs to be stored in a better condition. And then some seeds can't be stored, which this was sort of a surprise to me as a native plant gardener. It wasn't something I was aware of, but they're called recalcitrant seeds. They can't be stored. They can't be dried out. They lose viability. And this turns out to be many wetland plants, and even some trees like oaks and maples. You would think probably you could store maple seeds, but no, they lose viability. Now, if you're a scientist and you can do some special manipulations to the seed and freeze it to a certain negative degrees, they might be able to be stored. But when we're talking about the seed bank storage or refrigerator storage, they're not ones that can be stored. And that also has to do with spring ephemerals. A lot of spring ephemerals can't be stored. They're expecting to get planted right away. I should mention, I have a couple of URLs on this slide, and those are being posted to the chat. Okay, so the fact that we can't store seed and we can't always find wild populations to collect from means that we need to find a different way to make more seed available. And there is this concept, we didn't come up with this, it's out there. So there's this concept called founder plots, where you plant a bed of a particular species from a particular location that you can then tend to weed it, you can water it if necessary during a drought, and then you can collect the seeds from it. And that can help increase the amount of seeds that you have available to use. That means they're also called seed increase plots. And so this is a typical example of a founder plot that is at the Greenbelt Native Plant Center in Staten Island. This is a typical way they do it. And if you look at this, you can see the echoes of agriculture in this, right? It looks like someone has laid out rows, and they've got weed block fabric down, and they're probably going to take a machine through and harvest it, okay? We said, wild populations don't grow like that. Why can't we just do this like a wild population? We'll just plant a patch, and we'll grow it like a patch. And we're going to hand collect it anyway. We don't have to have a pure stand. And it'll be more closely experiencing its wild conditions, not weed block fabric and, the glare of sun off of the black plastic and things like that. So that's what we do for our founder plots. We do plots in the woods that we have labeled with a stake where it came from, and then that introduces another issue. Okay, I'm going to plant white wood aster. Oh, but there's white wood aster already here. That means I can't put white wood aster from a different ecoregion, from a different location, or they're going to cross-pollinate, and then it'll be So now I have to be careful of that. So, all right, so we do. We're careful of that as well. We were able to make a nice collection from one of our first founder plots this year. It really increased the amount of seed that we created from Bromus pubescens, which is a native woodland grass. So that's wonderful. Oh, I should mention here too, with the founder plots, this is one way that you could participate. You could create a founder plot on your property and collect seed. Okay. All right, so we also are interested in, like I mentioned, preserving the genetic diversity. So one of the things that we realized when we started to think about growing plants for woodland understory is there's a lot of species in the woodland understory that no nursery grows. And they never would because they're not showy. You know, Virginia jumpseed, you know, this, the Canada wild lettuce, and that's not really understory, it's more of a gap. But nobody's going to grow these things because they're not something you want to plant the showy flower in your yard. So we're making sure that we grow those as well, that we don't ignore the inconspicuous species because they have to have some role. You know, we're not going to ignore them. We also, when we collect seed, we have to sample the variability of the seed. So we just don't go out to a population once and collect seed from it and collect from the edge. We collect from the edge of the population, the middle. We try to sample throughout the population. Short plants, tall plants, different color flower plants. And then there are certain species, some species they all ripen at the same time, but some of them ripen over a long period of time, and that's why I put Canada wild lettuce on here. Canada wild lettuce blooms and produces seed for like a month and a half. And so we try to collect at the beginning, we try to collect at the end, we try to collect at the later part, so that we have all of that genetics. It gets even more complicated. So when you're growing plants from seed, they germinate at different times. The same batch can germinate a little bit here, a little bit a few weeks later, a little bit a few weeks later. They can even germinate years later, next year, the year after. If we're continually growing plants and taking the ones that germinate in that first year, we're selecting out the genetics that are delaying the germination. And that's adaptive for the population. It's good that they have that variability because if there's a drought, if everything germinates and there's a drought, all wiped out. But if they have extra seed that hasn't germinated and it's going to germinate next year, that population will survive. So what we have to do is keep the stuff that hasn't germinated after we take out the seedlings that have and give it a chance. Okay, so you can do that for multiple ways. One of the ways that we do is we just take the soil and put it on the top of the plant that we're potting up so that the seeds are still there. Another way is we just keep growing that whole flat for the next year and allow more things to germinate. And another way is we prick out the seedlings that have germinated and leave the rest there for the next year. So these are things you have to think about if you're really wanting to preserve that genetic diversity. So we also started to think about ferns. So we're teaching how to sow spores and grow ferns from spores. And we've taught, this is now 150 people, how to do this. And we have classes coming up if you're in the North Jersey area. We still have some openings in the March 15th class at Ridgewood. So you can sign up for that. Why grow ferns? Well, they're a part of the forest understory. Deer typically don't eat them. So that's a big reason to grow ferns. Because we can actually start a restoration without having the fencing up with ferns and grasses and sedges that the deer aren't going to eat, so we can get it started. Plants that are available from the nursery trade, first of all, they're from unknown sources. Where did that genetics come from? But then again, on the other side of the spectrum, spores are very light and they blow on the wind and they can blow vast distances. So maybe it doesn't matter. But yeah, still we like to be growing from our local ferns. The ones that are available in the nursery industry also probably are not grown from spores. It takes a long time to grow a fern from spores. It's a lot easier to do it from division or from tissue culture, and a lot quicker. And if they're trying to make money on the ferns, they don't want to wait that long time. So it makes more sense for them commercially. So the ferns you're buying are often clones. If it's a tissue culture or it's by division, they're clones. And so if we want genetic diversity, we need to grow from spores. So the other thing is that we can grow ferns that maybe aren't available in the nursery industry. They're local, they're species that are local. We can grow those from spores. So that gives us some more diversity that we can put in. So the other thing, many of you have probably experienced winter sowing, you're growing your own native plants. This is a way to up your game, right? The next level, the next thing to learn, okay? All right, so a lot of people say, well, ferns, does anything really eat them? I don't really ever think, yeah, something eats them. This is the tip of a Christmas fern frond rolled up into a little ball. I took a picture of this and I investigated what it was. I'm not an entomologist. I looked this up on iNaturalist. If it's not correct, blame them. But I thought it was very interesting. This moth lives in the darkest areas of forest. It's not something you would probably ever notice. And it was just first described in 2011. So, something uses it. Who are we to say, no, nothing uses it? So anyway, another reason to grow ferns. Okay, other open questions. We don't collect and grow rare, threatened, and endangered species, although we could if the park requested it. We do have the expertise to do that. But there's a lot of debate, and someone touched on this earlier, is should we be growing rare and endangered species and supplementing the population that's out there to help it survive, or even creating new populations in appropriate areas of those species? And some botanists and natural heritage folks are saying, yes, we should do that. And some are saying, no, we should not be doing that. And they haven't decided, okay. We have come down, well, first of all, we're volunteers. So we really don't need to be the ones growing the rare and endangered plants. So that's where we're staying there. But the idea of introducing new rare and endangered individuals into that population all has to do with the genetics again. Are we introducing things that will be helpful to that population, which could be true, or are we introducing genetics that could be bad for that population? I'm not a geneticist. I don't know. I can't study that. So I'm not going to presume that I can do that. Okay. So then we're also looking at how we can be more sustainable with what we do. So potting soils. I know some of you have probably been looking, how do I find potting soils that don't have peat in it, and will that work? We started looking, we're using this potting soil, it has peat in it. We're trying to restore a habitat, but we're destroying a peat bog in order to get soil to grow plants to restore a habitat. That doesn't make sense. We don't want to be doing that. So we have been investigating different options. There's something called pit moss, it's made out of recycled paper, something called organic mechanics, made out of I think it's pine shavings and coconut core and rice hulls. Don't quote me on that, but no peat or low peat. So we're trialing those things to try to get to a point where, you know, we're not destroying one habitat in order to create another. Okay, so some of the projects that we're working on. We're working in Black Rock Forest. The first section here is from New York. That's where I live, so those were our first partners. Black Rock Forest in Cornwall, they recently had, Water Authority has an easement through the property to a reservoir, and they scalped a whole hillside along the road as they were fixing the road. So we've got to restore that area now, and fortunately, that was one of my prime areas for collecting seed. So I have a whole bunch of seed from that hillside. So we're actually going to be able to grow the plants to put back on that hillside that were there. It was very hurtful when I saw it happen, but I thought, okay, well, that's the whole reason we exist. So we're going to do it. We're working at Granite Mountain, Farnstock State Park. This is a project I want to tell you about because it's very interesting. This is a state park in New York. They have New England cottontail habitat. It's a rabbit, New England cottontail. It's not the normal rabbit. It's different. New England cottontail, like scrubby areas and forests. It's not a meadow species. And the area that it lives in is covered with barberry, which is great for protection. It's good protection from predators, but then they end up with a very high tick load, which is not good for them. And so the park system wanted to create better habitat, but it's an endangered, or I think a special concern, but they can't just wholesale remove the barberry because that would remove the habitat that they have and it could be detrimental. And so what they're doing is they've done patches. They created a patch where they remove the barberry, put a deer exclosure up. We're planting inside to develop the understory and to create a nice scrub habitat. We're growing greenbrier, smilax for this. I had to look on the internet. How do we grow this? Nobody grows that. Why would you want to grow that? We're growing. Yeah, you probably had the same experience, right? Yeah. So yeah, we did two. They're like 10 meter by 10 meter plots. They're not huge, and we did two years ago, and then they came back to us last year and said we want to do another one. And the idea originally was we're just going to do these two and we're going to let it grow up, and then when it's ready, we'll take the fence out and study how the rabbit uses it. I'm thinking, okay, 10 years from now, we'll know whether this is okay. All right. But they came back to us last year and said, we want to do another one. So we did another one, and at the end of that, she said, I think we're going to do a couple more next year. So they're into this now, and they see that it's going to work, I think, and we're doing that. The last two projects on here in New Jersey, the first one is a small preserve in West Milford, New Jersey. This is North Jersey, and we just started working with them. We did a planting there last year. Closter Nature Center is brand new. It's in Bergen County, New Jersey. We started seed collection for that last year and growing plants, and we'll be doing our potting up in May and June and then planting this fall. And this project is supported by the Native Plant Center of New Jersey by the conservation grant. So thank you. Okay, so some results. Last year, we had 181 volunteers involved, plus our first seasonal employee. We grew 16,000 plants, more than 200 species, and we got 5,300 of those plants planted into 7 different restoration sites. 450 plants went to volunteers. We had excess plants. As you can see, we couldn't get them all planted, and that was for 2 reasons. We filled up our prepared sites, and we didn't have enough volunteers to do the plantings. But over 1,800 plants went to other nonprofits that we hadn't even anticipated partnering with. So they got those plants and put them in. So we started in 2022. This month is our 3rd birthday. And this is the extent of our main growing facility. That's the greenhouse on my property, and you can see on the right the white tent in the background. That's the easy up canopy. That's the extent of our growing area. So all those 16,000 plants were grown here and by volunteers. This is under an acre of our growing area. So you guys can be part of the solution. And I love this quote. It says, somebody should do something about that. Then I realized I am somebody, right? So when next time you look at your forests and you see the understory is missing, maybe you start to think about approaching the park with a partnership and organizing some friends and other native plant enthusiasts and doing some growing and planting to help restore the understory. And I love the project because anybody can be involved. And we had our youngest volunteer was under a year old. He helped stack up pots at a planting, and then he threw them down again, and then he stacked them up again. And our oldest volunteer is in her 80s. I won't say how old she is. But yeah, anybody can contribute. And even if you live in an apartment or you don't have any yard to plant anything because you've got a tray this big, and that's what you're caring for, and then it's coming back to us to get planted. We had 2 volunteers that lived in apartments that grew plants on their balconies. All right. So how you can help. What can you do, leading off of Doug's presentation? Well, if you'd like to keep in touch with us, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter. We send out a newsletter at the beginning of each month. It has our events. It has a little bit of educational information, but mostly people look at it for the events. You can donate on our website. It is our 3rd birthday, so we're having a donation drive. You can follow us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram right now, exploring other avenues as well. And you can share our information with other people, especially if you know someone who lives in our region that would love to be involved. Share and let them know. Or you could start your own group. Okay, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody that would like to do that. I'll be around the rest of the day. So thank you very much.
You did great. We're going to take the first question that came in over Zoom, Bobby.
Yeah, Zoom. We have several. I'm going to glom them together. So how do you train your volunteers? Is it basic botany? And then there have been a couple questions about soils. Do you use particular soils for those volunteers in the trays that they're growing? And do you use specific soils in the foundation gardens as well that mimic where you're planting?
Okay. All right, let me start with the last one first, the foundation plots. We're planting in the forest. We're not supplementing the soil or amending the soil at all, so that one was an easy one. The specific soils that we use for potting up, right now, first year we used Miracle Grow potting soil because it was the cheapest one we could find at BJ's. We're volunteers, so we don't have a lot of money. We used, I would say, probably 28 55-quart bags, which is a heck of a lot. Last year we started cutting that with organic mechanics mix, which is peat-free. And this year we're continuing that as we go through. One of the things that we're finding is different of the constructed soils have different drainage qualities, and some plants do better in those, like just the pure organic mechanics drains very well. Some plants do better in that. Some plants don't do good in that. So we haven't completely gotten off of Miracle-Gro, although we are going to start looking. Miracle-Gro has an organic mix now and a peat-free mix, so we're continuing to explore.
How do you train your volunteers?
How I train the volunteers. Thank you, Elaine. We have the potting up seedlings is pretty much in-person training where they pot up the seedlings in person. Planting, same thing. Seed collection, you have to take it's about a 1-hour training class where we talk about how to, we don't teach people how to identify. We assume that you already know how to identify your plants or you have some experience with them. We teach people that they should be using iNaturalist to document the populations, and then we teach how to properly, ethically collect and do the data recording, and how to handle those seeds once they're collected before the seeds get back to us. So I think that's it.
I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Questions from the floor?
Bob, Bill?
I'm we're involved in a small restoration, 5 acres, and,
Is it on?
close, I'm sorry, a 5-acre plot, and so you said to qualify you have to provide deer protection. What are you talking about is what you're looking for there?
Yeah,
Because
it
5
really
acres.
depends on the preserve. We do have a couple preserves in the northern Hudson Valley that have very good, fairly successful hunting programs.
Okay.
So they're able to keep the deer down to a good level, not perfect, but but then we also work in Westchester, which is deer heaven. So they have to put a fence up.
Okay, so as far as I know, because I just went to it with Jay Kelly, I think Cranford and Essex are like down to 20 deer per square mile. Is that is that doable? I guess that's
Yeah,
what I'm asking.
it's probably doable,
Okay.
and I mean, you'll know
Right,
when you
right.
plant, right?
I guess that's my point, is how much do we start if it's not, we can't do it, right? I guess
Right.
how much, when do you start? Because I just talked to Doug afterwards, worrying about the deer, and he said, if you can't control the deer, you can't start the project.
Yeah.
I don't know.
From our standpoint, there are things that we can plant, the grasses and sedges and ferns we can plant. And there are some other species that, tend to escape the deer. In Westchester, they have to put a fence up. Deer in Westchester will eat anything. Maybe Bergen County is the same way. They'll eat anything. So we require fencing in those situations. Well, a lot of times the naturalist knows, or somebody who's experienced with that park knows that, yeah, we see them eat this or we see them eat that. Or even the volunteers that live around that park will say, yeah, they eat this in my yard, they eat that in my yard. And it gives me an idea. So.
Okay. You want to move on to questions on that side?
How long do the exclosures have to stay in place? Is it indefinite?
In some cases, yes, because there's no possibility of controlling the deer. So like our preserves in Pound Ridge, they understand that those are permanent exclosures. So I think the minimum is 7 feet. There's someone here, there's someone,
Yeah, there's some up front.
yeah.
Yeah, you do. Phil.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So you're doing great work. How come New York DEC or New York Parks can't give you some nursery space and greenhouses to grow more plants?
Well, New York State Parks they don't have any nursery space. They have land. They could allow us to have some area of land. Some preserves have offered that, but it's sort of like you can use our land, but then we have to go there to care for things. So we've been hesitant to do that kind of thing. New York State Parks had a nursery in Western New York, so way too far to be helpful. They decided to close that down, or there was a reason they had to close that down. They gave us a whole bunch of pots and soil. So they have, supported in ways that they can. And some of our park partners and even other nonprofit parks that have gotten plants from us have paid us for the plants. If they can't pay, we don't ask them to, but they have paid us. Okay.
I had a question, which is, I saw that Essex County is on it was like in the zone of like where you guys would be working. Has there been any like consideration of doing work in either the South Mountain or Eagle Rock reservations?
We haven't talked with anybody in Essex County about being a partner.
Okay, cool. Well, awesome. All right. Would you be interested in like we're from Essex, so
Yeah, we would talk.
Of course.
Right now, it's a capacity thing. We probably got as many partners as we can deal with for the next year or two, but we would definitely talk.
Cool, awesome, thank you.
Hi, over on the other side. Not a question, but a comment. Well, two comments. First of all, this is incredibly inspiring. Second, I too have been on the journey of trying to figure out peat-free. With coco coir, with the pit moss, something I haven't tried, but I've heard amazing things about actually is sheep's wool as a way to retain the water. I don't know if that's something you can try, but I just wanted to share that because it seems like a renewable resource. I'm also curious if it would work with alpaca wood because we have a bunch of alpacas in Morris County. So
That's something to
just
try.
a note to consider
Yeah.
potentially.
There's a hand up in the back.
And there was somebody in the middle here too. How are we doing on time? Okay, just because we could take someone.
Hi, Linda. Thank you for being with us. I'm a past volunteer for the Trail Conference. Your experience with Trail Conference led you to Wildwoods. I was wondering how that worked out.
Yeah. What's your name, by the way? Mike. Okay. Yeah, I worked at the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference for almost 10 years. In that capacity, I was the Invasives Strike Force leader and create a program of volunteers that would go out and monitor hiking trails for invasive plants and record where they were. Ran a crew that did removals of invasives and also led the Lower Hudson Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, which was all the environmental organizations that were doing environmental invasives management, and that was funded from state of New York. So I was killing a lot of plants. And after a while, it gets to be feeling a little negative. I got into ecology because of native plants, and I've always grown native plants in my backyard and restored the habitats in my property. And I realized it was time for me to move back to that first love and actually start doing something positive. So it indirectly led to that.
Hi there. Not a question, a comment. First of all, I really applaud the work that you do in restoring the understory, and I particularly appreciated the slide that you had about plants that aren't as attractive, and that they are important as well. And I just want to point out I thought it was great the species that you put up there as an example was Canada wild lettuce. And yes, that has a long history of traditional edible and medicinal use. And that's a very good reason to cultivate a plant. And so also smilax, by the way, you mentioned, is, a lot of people, nobody would think, why cultivate that? Again, that's a species that has really wonderful edible uses. And if you're cultivating them because of that, that's a really, you can cultivate as much as you want.
Are there questions coming in from Zoom? That would be nice.
Do we have questions on the chat?
Oh, I'm sorry.
What is the typical size of your restoration areas?
It's usually under an acre. They're not big. We plant very densely with a lot of different variety. And I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but it's under an acre for each one.
Okay, and then questions about watering in these environments. Obviously, we talked about the drought.
Right.
And I'm sure that impacted New York as well.
Yes.
How do you manage that?
Yeah, so one of the reasons we do our plantings in the fall is because usually we don't have to care about watering. We plant from mid-September on, and typically we get a nor'easter during that time, a remnant hurricane or something like that, and we don't have to worry about watering. And then the plants are going dormant, right? In the fall, they're slowing down their growth. They're either going dormant or preparing to go dormant, so the water need isn't as high. And so we usually don't have to worry about that. Last year was a surprise, and we don't know how our plantings turned out. But we do plan to recruit local monitors, volunteers, to locally monitor the population with the instruction to bring water if necessary. So.
Oh, hold on, we'll have a live.
Thank you. Hi, great work, by the way. Love this. But I know your focus is genetic diversity. I know you focus on seeds and starting from seedlings and all of that. My problem is funding, time, people, things like that. But cut stem propagation, I know you mentioned it. It's a clonal growth that way, but it is easy. It is cost effective. It's less space intensive. Do you have any resources or a list of forest shrubs that do well as cut stem propagations? If you're only taking 1 or 2 stems from individuals and trying to make it diverse in that regard, where you're taking from multiple sources, do you have anything like that that would help?
Exactly. So I'm glad you brought this up, because we have struggled with this as well. We do divisions of Christmas ferns, of Pennsylvania sedge, cuttings from different forest shrubs that take forever to grow from seed. And we wanted to come up with sort of a rule of thumb or guideline of how we could best collect that to get diversity. And so we just, we put some numbers on, down on paper. This many populations to collect from, this many cuttings from this many individuals. Again, we don't have any genetic analysis to know if we're doing well with that, but we try to, as much as possible, not collect like everything from the same shrub and grow that from cuttings. We here a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, different populations. That's all we can do. And I don't have any problem with that, because it allows you to get started with some species that take a long time to produce. But I don't think that should be the only way that you're growing. So.
But just, do you actually have a species list that does well with cut stem? No?
No, not
Okay.
yet.
Okay, thank you.
Not yet.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you, Linda.
All right. I just wanted to point out that the Bergen-Passaic chapter actually works with Linda. We help recruit volunteers, and our people work with her in various ways. This is a great way for, I know there's a lot of chapter leaders here. It's a great way for chapter leaders to start to get involved, to get your chapters involved. And I also wanted to point out that at lunch, there is a table with a sign for each chapter. Please, chapter leaders, check in there. I'm going to be circulating there and taking down names of people who want to volunteer with various chapters, and then I'll share it afterwards. But if the chapter leaders can kind of show up, it's a great way to do some networking. And Linda will be there through lunch and throughout the rest of the day. So thank you very much.
That was a spectacular presentation, Linda. Thank you so much. It was just great. It was exactly what I was hoping for. It was just really fantastic, even more, actually. I wanted to point out that Linda does have a sign-up sheet next to where registration was. I've signed up, and I already don't have any time being president of NPSNJ, but I really am very eager. Plus, I want to learn how to propagate ferns.